Okay, so now that we have the code to save the entries and add a unique ID to the entry, which we'll use later, now we want to have the counter to the save, which is to load. And in order to do that, we have to think about how we're going to load it once we have the method to do so. So let's first code this load method. And so in here, I normally have set this up, but I haven't today. I have my app.js, I have my storage, I have my carbon footprint running. I do have some items in local storage right now. And then in this case, we're going to load all the carbon footprint entries from local storage, and it's going to return an array. And you'll see how we'll code this in a minute. Okay, so let's just first start coding it, because this is going to be what the function itself is going to do. So what we'll do is export, because this is something we're going to need to have access to in the app.js. So we'll say load entries. Okay, is going to be equal to a function. It is going to need something, so we'll do that in a minute. Okay, so think about what, actually no, sorry, no, it's not going to need anything. It's just going to load. It's not like we're passing things to it. It's that it is going to load it from local storage. So in this case, we would set up a const data string, kind of like what I had up here where I set up local value, local storage value. Now this will be in our code where we'll store what comes back. So this is local storage. We reference, and in this case, we're going to use the get item. And when we do the get item, all we have to tell it here is what our key is. Okay. Now, at this point, you might be going, well, wait a minute, why did we learn to parse? Well, because we actually want to check something here. Because there is a possibility, we want to say if if something comes back, if data string, now that's a truthy value. It either exists or it doesn't. So if nothing comes back, right, this wouldn't run. But in this case, if it does, if it is true, right, so in this case, let's put this comment in here. If data exists, then we do the parse, okay? But we just don't immediately do it unless we test for it, okay? JSON parse, okay? And then, yes, what are we parsing? We're parsing the data string, okay? So whatever calls this, we're going to then pass back, return back that parsed the JSON parse, whatever that string is. Now in this case, remember, it's a string because that's what local storage stores. Okay. Now we're not done with this, because like up here, we have to think about this could be fraught with different issues here. But for now, let's go ahead now and go over to our app.js and think about where we're going to have, where are we going to use this? When are we going to load entries? Well, you would load them on your page load, so therefore inside of your init function. Okay, this is where it would go. And this is why in here, on here is on startup, okay, when the page loads. So on startup, attempt to load any previously saved local storage in the entries that were in there. And again, the reason we can specify entries for a carbon footprint is we have a key associated with that. So what we can do is set up in here, say const loaded entries, and this is just a locally scoped to here is going to be equal to, okay, oh, not a function, no, we're going to call storage dot load entries. Okay, so what will happen here, right, it's going to call this, and then if it finds it, it'll return, and now we'll have loaded entries, right? But again, we're not quite done here, because there may be some issues with what comes back, right? And in this case, let's go ahead and code what we might think of here. So if And you've seen this method before, but I'll just go over it a little bit. Is remember that this entries, when it comes back, once it's parsed, because of the way we are storing it, we're pushing in an object into an array, right? So this is an array of objects. So in this case, we can say if that array, okay, dot length. And we've seen dot length because it looks at how many, in this case, objects are in there. If it's greater than 0, okay, so meaning, right, is there something in there? And let's actually put this in here because, oh, did I not? Oh yeah, actually here's, actually I'll give it to you here and make sure I've put it inside the content later so you can see it. So in this case, if data is loaded, all entries from the call to load entries, right? All of that entries into our main, and in this case we'll finish up the comment. Again, you'll see these when you actually look in there. I just forgot to put them in when I was setting up, okay, into our carbon footprint array using the spread operator, and that's what we're about to do, okay? So if we had something come back, which means we had an array of some type of length that had something in there, if it didn't, it would have been 0. But in this case, we're going to say carbon footprint entries, because remember, on page load, even if because we haven't called load entries yet, on page load, that is an empty array right here. Okay, so this is how we're bringing persistent storage back into memory. This is the process we're doing because we can't deal with this until it's in memory. We can't reference the persistent storage results. So let's come back down here. So then we're going to say carbon footprint dot push. In this case, we can still use that spread operator, and we could say loaded entries. Okay, so whatever they are, loaded entries. Then again, we don't, and the reason for the spread operator is we don't have to specify individual key value pairs. By doing the spread, it just brings everything back in. And then we could say console.log, right? Entries loaded from local storage. Okay, so now at this point, there could be an else, okay? If something else, right? So in other words, here, what would be the else, right? Because if it set up an empty array, which is what we're about to code over here, then we would have an else we would need to handle, okay? So let's come back now to our load entries because we're not through coding this yet, and I just wanted to show you the companion concepts, okay? So here at this point, okay, because we're checking if a data string exists, right, then return that. And in this case, right, if no data, and in this case, what are we saying, right? Here, did I have this? I hope I had this. If no data. Yeah, I didn't. My bad. Okay, so you'll see it in there. I'll have it there by the time you look at it. So because if this is true, then return that. Else, what do we do? Then in this case, we just return an empty array. Okay. And if it's an empty array, right, then this would run. And now, just to go kind of back and forth to kind of see how these things work with each other, down here we would say else, because in this case it's coming back as an empty array. We'd say console.log, right? No entries found in local storage starting fresh. Starting fresh means we're setting up an empty array. Okay? We've returned an empty array. Because at this point, this has already been set up as an empty array, but we're just starting fresh because your code is saying, hey, I went out to try to look. I looked in local storage. I didn't find anything. Okay, well, let's just tell, in this case, the developer, hey, we're starting fresh in this case. Now, we could test this code at this point, but there really is something else. And actually, let's actually just do that. Let's actually just do that. And look, even before we came back, it already did it loaded it into local storage. Okay, so now entries loaded from local storage already happened. But let's go to our code here, okay, and see what happens in our app.js, okay, right here. Because when we do a page load, right, we're gonna, oh, not here. Oh, you know what? That's why I had a breakpoint set. That's why. Let me just let it run. So actually, it's still loading. So let's actually do this, okay? So what we know in this case is that if we do a page reload, we know that in the application right now, we do have some local storage content that we want to bring back into our app, okay? So in order to see this happen, we're going to reload the page. And when we reload the page on a page reload, we know that we set up, right, this empty array. Cool. So now we're going to run through our code, right, set up everything, set up the init, and now once the DOM loads, which it has to load all the other, right, things that it needs. Now we're like, our DOM's loaded, okay? So now we're actually at the point now, setting up that the results container wouldn't be there. So now we're going to run load entries. Okay, so if we go over here and we're not passing anything to it, we're just saying, hey, go over and look for that local storage key. And what did it find? It found data. So if this exists, then just parse it and return it. Okay? Good. So now we know we have in memory now from this call, we have entries. So what do we want to do? In this case, this is the block that's going to run. That's going to say, hey, is the length greater than 1? And the answer is, and if you just want to understand, you can see it's length of 2 right here. So now we're going to run this, which basically says take this empty array right now. Right now, this array is empty. Okay? And in this line, push into that all those loaded entries that you have. And then this would be else, nothing. But if we were in, now let's show you how this line would run. Okay, so let's go ahead and let that run. So now we know we have back our carbon footprint data, right, from local storage. So let's simulate what I said. Let's go over here and say there's no local storage, right? So if we go over here to our app.js, again, we have it here now on page load. Same thing, load everything in, handle the init. Init does the load. We come down here, and now when we, setting the results. So now we're going to storage load entries. So now in this case it's going to go out and look, and what came back? Null, nothing. So in this case this is no longer true, so we're not going to run this, we're going to run this. And we don't even have to do else, because if this comes back as in this case it's what we call a truthy, or it's in this case falsy value, it's false, there's null is a false, and a false boolean. So now we say, okay, return an empty array. So then when we return an empty array and we check, hey, is our loaded entries greater than? Is it? No, it's not. So now we jump to here and we go, hey, you know what? No entries found, local storage, starting fresh. So this is how we move things from our local storage back and forth. Okay, so from local storage into memory, right? And then when we update, right? So then in this case, when we add another, so now right now there's nothing in, right? We don't have anything because we're starting fresh in this case. And then as we add our entries, right, and we'll just let this run. Okay, so now we do have data stored to local, so data saved to local storage. So not only do we have it in memory as we're seeing here, but we also have it in local storage. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do here is actually make this a bit more robust, because we need to consider other things that could be happening in this load entry, right? Like before, we're going to do a try and we're going to do a catch with an error. Okay, so we set up our signature. So what are we going to try? Well, we're going to try this right here. Okay, all of this. So let's put this in here. How about tab over, right? So if, oh, guess I forgot something. Let's take all of it with this. If we don't take this part, it won't work. Okay, right? We try to go, we go out and try to get it, right? If anything in here throws an error, then we're going to handle that, right? Otherwise, right? So let's say try, and this also, think about this, has to go in here. Okay. So actually in this case, let me make sure I have all my syntax correct, right? I think I've forgotten here because I don't, yeah, see, and by the way, this is actually good to see. Notice how this is red up here, which really means that what I forgot to do is I don't have, let's see, I don't have a complete, because in this case I should have, this is here, so I'm missing, oh, I think it's just because I haven't written the corresponding. So let's actually go ahead and write that. So it should be there. Okay, I think that's all it is. And really this is where you get used to going, oh, okay, actually no, right here. So after this, that's where it was. Yeah, that's where it was. Okay, so what it was is in this if block, right? I didn't have the final. Let me check that. Yeah, so in that case, I had this in the wrong place. Which, by the way, the way I could see that is that this was lightly colored, which means it would never run that line. And I know based on my logic, actually it should. Okay. So what I needed to do was have this here. Okay. There we go. That's what it was. Okay, so this is just understanding. As a matter of fact, if I was really to make this a little, matter of fact, this would be a great way to go, hey, format this selection, make this a bit more readable. And this is the benefit of formatting your code, is that you can kind of fall through it and go, okay, if, right, do this, else, right? And now in this case, it's not else, it's just otherwise. And actually, see this, if this runs and it returns this. Otherwise, it's just going to fall through. That's why I don't need the else, because it's only going to reach this if this is falsy. But in this case, we're going to do something else here, right? So on the error, because on the error, if something happens, right, we'll console.error, as we did before, right? And in this case, we'll go error loading entries from local storage. Now in that case, I'm actually going to have you do a little research about the things that can happen, what could cause this to actually error out, and why we have to handle it. So in this case, I'll go ahead and put E. Okay, so we can see what that error was. Now in this instance of that there's an error, there's a last method we want to use, which is local storage.remove item. In this case, let's tell it that key. Okay, so if for some reason that was an error, like when we tried to do anything here, Like here's an example of one that I've seen, is especially when I used for my last semester's class where I local storage, and because students actually sometimes will write their objects a little differently, somebody's code may not run because of the way it's trying to reference something, or that they've put an extra item in there and their code can't handle that. So in this case, you're just making your code more resilient, right? Again, we probably, let's say if no data is, I think we've already put this one in there, right? If no data is stored, if corrupt, here we go. If corrupt data, okay, to clear the previous, right? So clear whatever is in there so that we can just start again because something happened to local storage. So again, the reason we're doing this try block is just to make our code a bit more agile, in the sense that it can handle, at least in this case, an error on getting that. Okay, so I know there was a bit here, but I do hope that you walk away with a good understanding. So here's what I want you to research, is why do we need to convert from local storage into something JS can handle? Or in this case, I've been talking about it is in memory. Why do we need to go back and forth? And what error can occur when retrieving local storage data? And that way you can do some research. And I'll actually try to find a situation, maybe I'll cover it in attendance. We'll see where that actually can happen. So there's your commit message, and then we are done with 5.1. Talk to you later.